Grain Elevator and Processing Society is hosting their annual Jeeps Exchange Conference at the Kansas City Convention Center, February 22nd through the 25th of 2025. Jeeps Exchange is the biggest and best show in the grain industry with more than 400 exhibitors and 45 hours of education. It is the best place to find grain handling and processing operation solutions all in one place. Jeeps Exchange brings together industry professionals from across the world to help build professional networks and connect with the products you need. Come walk the trade show floor, take part in live demonstrations, innovation stations, and see new equipment. Make valuable connections through a variety of fun and exciting social events. Early bird pricing ends January 28th. Learn more and register at jeeps.com/exchange. In this interview, our guest will take us on a journey through the vibrant world of the grain handling and processing industry in South Africa. We'll learn about the various grains grown in the region and gain a deeper understanding of the economic conditions shaping the country's agriculture. But that's not all. We'll also dive into the challenges faced by the grain storage sector, including the energy crisis, infrastructure constraints, and labor demands. It's a candid conversation that sheds light on the complexities of the industry. Let's go. Welcome to the Whole Grain Show. I'm Jim Lenz, your host and Director of Global Training and Education at Jeeps, where the mission of the Grain Elevator and Processing Society is to champion, connect, and serve the global grain industry and our members. At Jeeps, we work to be the global community and thought leader in the grain industry, which feeds and fuels the world. Thanks for listening today and for joining the network of thousands of other grain handling and processing professionals across the globe taking strategic steps to grow professionally. The Whole Grain Show will offer compelling stories and experiences of individuals from all corners of the grain handling and processing industry, offering unique perspectives that inspire, educate, and connect professionals within the global grain community. Embark on a journey of discovery as we delve into the diverse world of grain industries worldwide, uncovering the innovations, challenges, and solutions that shape this essential sector. I'm thrilled to have you join us for this captivating episode. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the grain industry in South Africa, guided by none other than Wessel Lemmer, the general manager of the AgBiz Grain. AgBiz Grain is a key player in the Agricultural Business Chamber, or AgBiz. The Agricultural Business Chamber is a voluntary, dynamic, and influential association of the agribusinesses with the mission to negotiate and position for a favorable agricultural business environment so that its members can perform competitively and profitably. AgBiz is dedicated to advocating for a favorable agribusiness environment in the South Africa region. Discover how AgBiz takes the lead in fostering solutions and private sector collaborations to overcome these challenges and build a resilient and sustainable agri-food system in South Africa. It's a candid conversation that sheds light on the complexities of the industry. Wessel will share how AgBiz is at the forefront of facilitating solutions and private sector collaborations to overcome these challenges and build a resilient and sustainable agri-food system in South Africa. So get ready for a wealth of knowledge and unique insights into the grain industry in this part of the world. Without further ado, let's dive into the interview. Today, we welcome the general manager of AgBiz Grain. He previously served as senior economist for a couple different organizations that supported the egg industry. Welcome, Wessel Lemmer, and thanks for your participation in Whole Grain.
Thank you, James. Thank you. It's good to have you.
Now, AgBiz Grain is a function of the Agricultural Business Chamber, also called AgBiz. AgBiz is based out of Pretoria, a city in the province of Gauteng, within the northeastern section in South Africa. AgBiz is a voluntary, dynamic, and influential association of agribusinesses within the mission to negotiate and position for a favorable agribusiness environment so that its members can perform competitively and profitably. Can you tell us a little bit about your organization, Agricultural Business Chamber, or AgBiz, and how they support ag and support the grain handling and processing industry in South Africa?
AgBiz Grain is a desk within AgBiz. So AgBiz Grain is focusing primarily on the handling and storage sector in South Africa. We have 12 members, and our 12 members jointly handle and store about 70% of the crop is produced in South Africa, of which there's about 9 different commodities. So we are part of AgBiz, and AgBiz delivers behind the farm gate services to the agriculture sector, which span across crop production, livestock and fruit, but that is more on the processing side, on the business side, not on farm level side. And the services that AgBiz render to our members also is specifically in terms of water-related issues, land right issues, electricity, Eskom, those functionalities, labor law, and all of that. While AgBiz Grain, as a desk within AgBiz, we focus specifically on those grain handling and storage issues in South Africa, policy, regulations, negotiations, and lobbying other companies or organizations to better our business environment. Similarly, I think that the GIPS is doing.
Very nice. Thank you for sharing. I don't want to make any assumptions here because we have listeners from around the world, but what grains are grown in South Africa?
So the main crops that we represent and that we handle and store is mainly the commodities, which include maize. So we have the yellow maize varieties. The majority of these crops are gene crops, genetically modified crops. And then we have also white maize. So it's yellow maize and white maize, very similar to what you produce in Kansas and Mexico. The white maize in South Africa is mainly for human consumption, and yellow maize for animal feeds consumption. And then we have sorghum, which is the summer crop that we have. Going to your winter crops, we have winter wheat types, and then also malting barley that we produce. Going to the oil seeds, it's canola, the winter rainfall region. We have the summer rainfall and the winter rainfall region. It's canola, and then also soybeans and sunflower seed. And then a little bit of groundnuts in between. So it's more or less your 9 commodities, including maize and wheat. I think I've covered all of them.
Yeah, a good variety for sure. Very neat. To provide a broad perspective for our listeners from around the globe, what are economic conditions like right now for your country? Is South Africa seeing anything that resembles just before the pre-COVID levels of growth?
No, what we see recovery, but the economic growth in South Africa is under strain. But what is very interesting, if you compare that South Africa to, say, our competitors that produce similar commodities than we do in South Africa, is that what we note is that although our economic growth may not recover than in some of the developed countries, because we are a developing country, regarded as a developing country, food inflation did not increase as much as it was in the developed countries. And if you take the economic growth and food inflation and general inflation in South Africa, it seems as if our consumers is better off in South Africa than elsewhere. And that's simply because of that the difference between economic growth, the GDP, and inflation. That gap, that bracket is better for our consumers here because we are, in terms of commodities, especially in maize and white maize. White maize is a staple in South Africa, and we are a net exporter of white maize. And that makes a huge difference in terms of food prices for staple and for the most poor segment in South Africa. So the farmers in South Africa makes a big contribution to the welfare of the general public in South Africa. That is something that we don't see the increases in food inflation that you may see in developed countries that need to import food and import those commodities. We have other challenges, but we can talk about that. I think you have questions about our challenges that are similarly to other parts of the world.
Thank you for sharing that. It's interesting. Along that line, where does South Africa stand in terms of supplying its country's needs of grain? What % of grains harvested are exported?
I can quickly tell you what we did for white maize, for instance. I have the numbers. Let's do total maize numbers. So we produce about, last year it was 16.3 million tons of maize in total. This year, where the projection for 2022-2023 is 15.3 million tons. And what we export is we don't import, but we exported last year 4.1 million tons of maize. And this year we expect it will be about 3.4 million tons. So we're totally self-sufficient in terms of maize production. And that adds to the low inflation numbers. And that is specifically on white and yellow maize, both of them.
Yeah.
So this is the total number that I've shared with you.
Does South Africa have the grain storage infrastructure to support the existing and future demand? Where are you standing with that?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Jeep's training and education program is proud to release Introduction to Grain Operations. This new course is a multimedia version of what was known as Jeep's 500, with dynamic graphics, video examples, photographs, multidimensional illustrations, animations, and interactive exercises. This course is sure to prepare your teams for the work you need them to do. This is a great industry primer at a great price. For a limited time, Jeep's members may purchase the course for just $195. Non-members still save and pay just $295. For more information, visit jeeps.com.
In South Africa, our main storage structure is cement and concrete structures. So that's something, there's some history about it. So when we have a single channel marketing board, and in the past I remember it was very interesting, as soon as the single market channel for maize, when they deliver and export maize and they hedge themselves on the Chicago Board of Trade, it was quite a significant event on the Chicago Board of Trade as soon as the maize crop in South Africa is harvested and hedged. But the single marketing board maize, that structure, developed infrastructure throughout South Africa, also along railway lines, and that's huge concrete structures. So the average size of an individual silo is about 70,000 tons, and some of them are built as high as 35, 40 meters in terms of height. So it just gives you an indication of the size, but that was because it was a single channel marketing scheme. Now, since deregulation, that was about more than 20 years ago, you also see that there's a growth in production, grain production, and there's also then a growth in expansion in terms of silo bags, bunker facilities, and what we also call grain dams. We've also noted that on average, you don't see investment on average that is, if you took the 5-year and longer average storage infrastructure that's in place, you don't see that there's investment unless there's produced more than that long-term average that the capacity can be, because otherwise the investment doesn't make sense. You don't know if it's going to earn the income on the grain. But we have very good production seasons the past 3-4 years, and we expect this year also to be a very good production season in terms of the climate, weather. And what is that investment in especially silo bags and bunkers, and not necessarily the traditional concrete or cement silos. You don't see that anymore, but you do see silos made from, zinc. The zinc silos that you have there in the background. And also there's a big move to on-farm storage, where farmers put their own storage on-farm to enable them to collect the crop and then be able to market at their own leisure. But it's more of a throughput facility. So what we do if we have the SAGES, South African Grain Information System, South Africa, that capture all the commercial structures. So as soon as a producer stores maize for commercial purposes for his fellow farmers, then we regard it as a commercial structure. But if it's for his own benefit, we don't register it as commercial storage, official commercial storage. So that's maybe something that's an interesting development. And I think there's a couple of questions about what the size of this informal on-farm storage is.
So there's a historical perspective on grain infrastructure examining revenue that's developed. There's been a good few years you expect of harvest and expect this year to be excellent as well. So that's fantastic. Can you share with our listeners how the AgBiz, along with the South African government, currently provides support to the grain storage?
Since deregulation, when all the different agents of the Single Marketing Channel Board, when they privatized, we had to introduce the South African Futures Exchange, which is now the JSE, the Commodities Advisory Division within the JSE. It's for the purpose of hedging. But from a government point of view, there's very little support to the handling and storage sector in South Africa. There's no subsidies. We have to maintain our own silos through handling and storage fees. And there's also, it differs from each and every company. It's not the same all over. And so I think that's something that maybe is the same for our producers as well. So we have to survive in a very competitive environment without significant support. The only support that you have is maybe in terms of tax write-offs, but that's how it is anywhere in the world.
Yeah. I want to just change things up here, as there are so many discussions going on in the grain industry around the world about building resilient and sustainable agri-food systems. South Africa is experiencing an energy crisis, as there are so many other countries around the world as well. But how does this impact the grain storage sector in South Africa?
So according to the value chain, so as soon as you look in terms of the electricity infrastructure in South Africa, so our electricity energy generation in South Africa, electricity generation is mainly coal-based. You know what the view in terms of coal is worldwide. Yeah, we have to get away from coal, maybe change up to other renewable sources like solar. That's very good in South Africa. But given the lack of proper maintenance of Eskom by government, because it's a government institution, and a loss of expertise over years, we have serious blackouts in South Africa. Now, as soon as you have a blackout like that, you need to have backup power in terms of diesel generators, which is very costly. I think it's 4 times the cost of normal electricity. Your systems is down. You can't, without electricity, you can't accept grain for delivery. So you have to have these backup systems in place, which is very costly. And it's quite severe in South Africa, throughout South Africa, because we have the centralized electricity supply from Eskom throughout. We don't have different suppliers of electricity. And then that relates back to a simple thing like we are now busy with a sampling protocol and a dispute protocol that we need to define a specific instrument to use. And that instrument that we need to use must be a twin bore sampler and a twin bore sampler, because you simply don't have electricity where you can use standard equipment that's electricity driven. It's a pneumatic device. So that is, for instance, one thing that you need to take into consideration. Then, in terms of the drying of your grain, accepting grain earlier for farmers to get better prices, you may have drying problems. The accepting of grain, that rate of intake and the rate of outloading, especially which is very important for price convergence and SAFIX. You can't load out because of electricity disruptions, then it impacts your outloading capability and outloading rate. Then, which is actually more severe, is in terms of your exports to the harbor. The majority of our locomotives is electricity driven. So if you have a blackout, that impacts the transport of freight to the harbors, but there's a certain section where it's not exactly the blackouts because of electricity, but it's also in terms of theft. So you have on a frequent basis a theft of a 50-kilometer stretch of of railway line where cable thieves just came and collect the cables. They even took the railway infrastructure that was laid down the railway lines and take it for scrap.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it's not possible for the police and security to always check on that. So what we do in South Africa, we have Sakota and we have AgBiz Grain and we have farmers and the farmer associations along these lines to install cameras and to invest in cameras to keep, if there's something happening, then you can be on the spot. And there's a very close collaboration also with Transnet, freight rail to get them going. Then they can come out and the security can come and apprehend the criminals. Because you as a farmer or a storage operator don't have the mandate to do that. It must be from them. So that is a serious issue because if you have problems like that, it can stop a shipment from South Africa out to Durban port for a week. And you can just imagine the demurrage costs in the harbour if a ship lay waiting to be loaded. So that's a serious issue in South Africa, but we are successfully start to address that through private initiatives. And then you get to the harbour, where the harbour in Durban, it didn't grow or develop over time to keep track with the growth in the economy and the growth in terms of our exports of fruit, of grains, etc. So the congestion in the Durban harbour is extensive, and that's also something that we need to address. But it's not that easy. So we really have some tough challenges going into the future, and it's something that needs to be addressed by the private sector. Transnet developed over time now to a point where they start to get third-party collaboration with private sector to see where there's opportunities to get private sector involved in railways. Investment in railways, they will maintain the main lines, but then private sector must come in and provide, especially those lines that collect grain to the main lines, then Transnet will take over. But it's initiatives like that's coming up that I think it's very necessary to get our exports going together with all the other sectors in fruit, like fruit.
Wow, I'm taken back by what you shared there. Incredible challenges that are going on in the grain sector in general, and you have some real specific challenges there in South Africa. And much of this work is by the private sector trying to do this, and it's not as much by the public sector to get that support. It's interesting.
The support was in the past up to now, in terms of monetary terms, totally absent. Going forward, it's collaboration with the public sector, maybe to get private sector involvement in rail specifically, to get going. Private sector involvement in terms of the security of the lines, because the police don't have the capacity to do that. Yeah, there's major challenges. And then also in terms of when you look at, there's no incentives, very little incentives in terms of going through on the national grid for electricity. So if you have to go and put up a solar system to run a silo complex, we do have examples of that. It's costly. We become now more viable as the electricity tariffs. We expect the electricity tariffs to increase, and it becomes more viable over time. But it's all private sector driven, and it must make sense to pay off a time period of 3 to 4 years to make it viable. So yes, very much private sector involved in South Africa. Grain on rail declined to a level of 10% grain on rail compared to what it was in the past, 70-80%. And it's all on road, and our roads are getting worse because of the lack of maintenance on the roads. But it's the traffic in South Africa on the roads, heavy what do you call that? Heavy load traffic.
So can you just tell us again, you had a past where a lot of grain was being transported via rails, via trains. And now that has dropped incredibly. What are some of those primary reasons why that is the case?
First of all, what happened is when Transnet Freight Rail, there was a transformation period. What happened is after deregulation, if you compare it with the single channel marketing board era, where you have the government have agents throughout South Africa that collect the grain in these bins that privatized afterwards. And each and every one of these concrete cement bin silos have a railway sideline connecting to the main lines to export and for the inland areas. So after deregulation with the introduction of the JSE and traders in South Africa, because you don't have the single marketing board now run by government, it's now privatized and through traders. That's about more than 20 years ago. Traders rail, or they tend to ship and market smaller volumes by truckload, 32 tons, 34 tons truckload compared to a grain truck, which is 42 tons, and it's 50 railway cars at once. So that didn't happen anymore. That's part of the decline in rail. So Transnet preferred to give preference to rail where they still have volumes going, where it's for Transnet viable, and so for instance in iron ore, things like that. So they keep that up and they neglect the terms of grains, which is to a certain extent understandable. And that is, I think, one of the main causes for a downturn. But recently we see in South Africa that there's an uptake and third-party private sector involvement at the moment as Transnet realized they need to get other parties involved, third-party operators involved to get things going.
Now, speaking of get back to energy here, grain elevators and processing facilities need both an affordable and sustainable energy supply, right? As in other industries, there's pressure to move away from fossil fuels to more renewable energy resources. And at the same time, facilities are transitioning to smart technologies. There is a digital transformation going on. How are grain handling and processing facilities managing these challenging times with regards to energy and upgrading facilities with technology? What are you seeing in South Africa?
Well, what's very promising in South Africa, if you start down the supply chain to the producers, so we have access to the latest technologies in terms of the seeds technology, genetically modified seeds, to the latest fertilizer and pesticides, which is under adoption by our farmers, commercial producers. It's quite quick and sustain the production. And increases production from year to year, and that goes into the silos. Now, at silo level, you see the same. You see that we have amongst our 12 members, in terms of the technological advancement, there's infrared technologies that monitor the stock in bins. If there's any movement in grain, you pick it up. They know exactly what is in the bins. And we have very good systems in place in terms of the grain laboratory. It is also privatized, financed, and our grain information system throughout South Africa, where we can, on a national basis, have a very good idea what the grain situation in terms of supply and demand is, and in terms of stock levels carrying from on a monthly basis, it's reported, and we also have these weekly reporting at the national level. It's very good. And if you look at our crop estimates that's done in South Africa, very advanced with drones and even, so if you look at our target, we target that the crop estimates committee must be within the range of 5 to 8% to the final number that's actually harvested. And they are within, and even some years below 5%, which is very good, very accurate. So we have very good information systems in place. Also in the handling and storage sector, in terms of the systems that we developed in South Africa that's unique to South Africa. So I think I'm very happy about that. But we always, from AgBiz Grain point of view, we strive to drive new technological development and to address issues in the industry that's needed. We've developed a grain food safety conduct lately that each of our members subscribe to or they support it. We have the sampling protocol, we have the dispute protocols throughout the sector, which is globally recognized because we measure it, we benchmark it with the ICC standard. And so I think that's a very important message also to give through to the world, that grains is handled very efficiently, and then in terms of the trust, know what you get in terms of grading and the quality. And it's a sun-dried kind of quality that you have in South Africa, which is naturally dried. Very little of our grain gets dried in the bin, which is very fortunate that we have a climate for that. We have the climate for that.
Yeah, interesting. How is the Agricultural Business Chamber supporting the grain storage sector in the midst of all these challenges such as supply chain, energy crisis, grain storage infrastructure challenges, and labor demands?
Okay, so first of all, AgBiz, of which Grain is a member, what AgBiz do is we are recognized by government and Transnet that we are representing the total sector in terms of when you look at infrastructure for rail, and approach AgBiz to have these discussions on where is the potential or the low-hanging fruit to develop sector through this third party access. And that is very positive, because what happens then is you can provide Transnet with a center where you can provide them with necessary strategic information so that they can make the best optimal decisions to see where you can expand rail capacity, invest for them to invest in rail capacity to benefit the sector. And that was something that we didn't have in the past. So I think AgBiz plays a very significant role there. And then we also have this safety and health forums, the SHEC forums, that is on a quarterly basis that we get experts in from an AgBiz point of view in terms of health and safety in the workplace for our employees. So we have very specific issues in terms of legislation, which is something that's very important for the health and safety of the employees. So there's a lot of work done by the private sector through AgBiz that is not necessarily done by government. We also facilitate a process now. We make sure that the government, just an example, last year a government came out and they want to introduce an inspection service on grading, which is a function that was self-regulated over the past 20 years. Make sure the grading, the intake, outtake, outloading there's nothing wrong with that. And the industry did it on our own. But that was something that's required by the Agricultural Product Standards Act. So they have to appoint assignees because they can't do that function on their own. So it's private sector assignees that they appoint to do that. And the cost must be covered by the industry. So last year, it's about maybe 18 months ago, they announced in the government gazette the inspection fees and the time of introduction, and then the industry successfully appealed against that because the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act was not followed by government and the assignees, and the private sector won that case, that appeal. And we said to them, we must bring government to table to decide jointly to get to a point where we agree on a principles document. How are we going to negotiate with government on what the industry needs, and not to be prescribed by government what they think we need? And so we get them back to the table, but it costs. It has a huge financial cost, legal cost to get to that point. And we are now in that process to agree on that principle. Now, after about 2 years, that was something that was government-driven since 2016. And at this point, we get to an agreement. Given that we have now principles going forward to negotiate an assignee, what the assignee must do to inspect the grading of commodities in South Africa independently. In the past, it was on a contractual basis between a buyer and a client in the silo storage operator, and it worked very well because it was monitored at inloading and outloading. It's actually a duplication. We don't want that because it's just an unnecessary cost, as we see it, because it was done well and there was no complaints. It was not even complaints registered. And we have a dispute settlement process within the industry that was very efficiently private driven. So that is one of the challenges that we had for this year, for the coming year, to implement and introduce an assignee for that purpose. Yeah, so that is one thing that AgBiz also facilitate, because AgBiz is seen as independent. You will note that in South Africa we have a very unique voluntary system that we have. We have different forums for maize, for wheat, for sorghum, and then for oilseeds. It's a forum that registered parties or stakeholders with government can get together and discuss issues of public concern in the value chain. And you have a forum steering committee with a chairperson and secretariat that's funded by trusts. And the storage sector in South Africa collect these levies for these different trusts. So for the maize trust, sorghum trust, potato cereal trust, Saucet, and in oilseeds to privately fund necessary functions like the South African Grain Laboratory, South African Grains Information Service, and then research that needs to be done in South Africa for basic production research, that most of it is funded by the private sector and it's private sector driven. So and we need to prioritize it very accurately to make sure that we get back what we invest there as a private sector. And some of it is voluntary, some of it is compulsory statutory levies, but it's coming from the private sector. So government plays a very small role in South Africa in agriculture in terms of support. It's mainly private sector driven.
Oh, it's great to have your organization there to support the egg industry. It's very important to have these forums that collect information to try and make the best decision. I appreciate you connecting with us on whole grain. It's special to have this perspective from you, your background, your organization, AgBiz, and just get an overall perspective on what's going on in South Africa. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, James. Can call in again. Thank you. Appreciate it.
A big thank you to Wessel Lemmer for sharing his expertise and giving us a glimpse into the dynamic grain industry in South Africa. It's fascinating to learn about the work of AgBiz Grain and their efforts to create a favorable environment for agribusiness in the region. Remember, you can find this episode and more on the dedicated whole grain page on the Jeeps website at jeeps.com/whole grain, along with show notes and a transcript. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app to stay updated with all the latest episodes. If you and your organization are interested in sponsoring an episode or being featured on the Whole Grain Show, or if you need assistance with audio ads for your product or service, reach out to me, Jim Lenz, the Director of Global Training and Education at Jeeps. You can email me at james@jeeps.com. Before we sign off, a shout out to the Grain Elevator and Processing Society, a leading organization dedicated to advancing the grain handling and processing industry. Be sure to visit jeeps.com for more valuable resources. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you gained valuable insights into the grain industry in South Africa. Keep listening to Whole Grain for more engaging conversations that impact our world.